There is something that has been bugging me lately really badly, and I guess it'd be fair to say that it's always bugged me to some extent, and that's the disconnect between the stories that I love to watch and read and the way that game mechanics get in the way of some of those stories and scenes when we try to tell them together ourselves, at the table. While there are many, many more of these small mechanics that don't seem to lend well for good storytelling, there's one that I think is the glaring, shiny problem, the elephant in the room, and that's hit points. Now, I have always been a big proponent for the game portion of a role-playing game like Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and I absolutely understand the necessity of this mechanic. I mean, without it, people would just drop dead the second they got hit with one arrow or crossbow bolt, and that's not fun for anyone. But I think it's obviously a big challenge when it comes to storytelling. It simply gets in the way of the narrative. So the question is, are hit points outdated? Is this a barbaric game mechanic trudging along almost 50 years later in a game that's had over 5 new adaptations to it and been the inspiration to hundreds, if not thousands more? I think it might be. But maybe the better question is, does it matter? I mean, what are we going to do? It's not like Wizards of the Coast is going to rewrite Dungeons and Dragons 5e and get rid of their hit point system. Paizo's not going to change Pathfinder or Starfinder, although clearly they are looking at trying to break the mold a bit and try something different if you do look at Starfinder's hit point and stamina system. Are we going to write a bunch of homebrew rules and try to force them in, not only for our players, but also by rewriting every monster stat block in all of our books? No way. I mean, if you sat down at Gen Con to play Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and the Dungeon Master looked over at you and said, "I don't use hit points, I rewrote the entire game system," you're gonna stand right back up and walk away from that nonsense. And should you? Yeah, maybe, probably, maybe not. See, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Let's say I'm playing a powerful sorcerer assassin like the Dark Mage build I just did, and I calculatingly work my way for months into the graces of nobles, blending in with them under my new alias. I've stalked and studied my target, and finally have been invited to a small but expensive banquet to celebrate a noble family being honored with a new stewardship as a vassal to the West Hills and its accompanying Dragon Top Keep. And moments after the speech, when everyone is caught up in the revelry after the many boorish toasts, I strike. Without a single verbal, somatic, or material component, I cast a subtle dominate person spell, taking control of the newly gifted patriarch for whom the feast is for. I have complete and utter control of him. His actions are my actions. It only takes a moment. But he reaches for the crossbow at his hip, holds it firm to the bottom of his jaw, and pulls the trigger, firing straight up. The result in this story, I think it should be obvious. But the result in a Dungeons and Dragons game, who knows what the outcome might be? What level was the NPC? Did he have class levels? Will the Dungeon Master just call for a crit? Which, even doubling the 1d8 attack to a whopping 2d8 isn't really going to do much against the CR5 Noble with fighter levels. Hell, even a lowly CR 1/8 plain Noble has 9 hit points on average, and 2d8 critical damage from the crossbow bolt might not even roll enough to drop 9 hit points from the lowest CR in the entire game. What would the outcome be if I used my Dominate spell to have him just jam his dinner knife into the side of his temple? I imagine many different Dungeon Masters might rule it in many different ways. But if we saw this in a movie, read this scene in a book, I think most people would expect this person to perish, and reasonably so. But hit points, as a game mechanic, certainly make the outcome much more convoluted. But you know what? Maybe that was too clean of an example. What about the rogue that sneaks up on a bugbear that's asleep in a cave? He tries to slit his throat. How many Dungeon Masters would call for an attack roll? Not every Dungeon Master, but perhaps a healthy portion. Let me give you one more, and this is the one that I think really gives me issues. Your heroes catch the villain, months of chasing him from town to town, and they finally catch him face to face. It's a big moment in the campaign, but you've thrown in a twist. As the players confront this evildoer late at night at the docks, they exchange a few words, and it's about to come to blows. But what's this? The villain smiles as his right-hand minion, known as the Butcher, steps out from behind a few crates, his blade catching the moonlight as he holds it to the neck of a teenage girl. The moment grows more tense as the bard recognizes the girl as his younger sister, Lily. A threat is issued. One more step, and the girl loses her singing voice along with her head, as the villain turns and boards his awaited vessel. But this scene, thanks to hit points, isn't possible at most tables. I think most of you experienced players have a good indication of what is about to really happen next. The players immediately proceed to attack everyone and simply healing word the girl back to life the first round after initiative. I mean, come on, we know what's gonna happen. And I'm not even going to talk about players at the gates of towns with several town guards pointing crossbows at them. Depending on the group's level, I mean, they could look like an undead porcupine with a dozen crossbow bolts sticking out of their face and just keep trucking right along, decapitating people. It's these scenes that I long for at the table. When I'm reading a book and you can feel the fear from the protagonist caught in his bedchambers with the click of a crossbow or point of a sword pressed against their spine. Those moments where swift death is a possibility because they don't have a stat sheet that says they have 78 hit points and they could probably survive a few crits before they'd even begin to worry. The problem is hit points. So I'll ask again, what can we do at the table? What's fair? Because whatever we decide when we start tweaking and stretching rules to suit our tastes and our table has to take everything into consideration. We can't just start letting arrows immediately kill players. If we did, no one would have finished the first scene in the starter set. I think the best rule of thumb is to look at the player's handbook and perhaps an inference that we simply skipped over. The actual description of hit points in Chapter 1 and again in Chapter 9. Quote, your character's hit points define how tough your character is in combat and other dangerous situations. Followed up with Chapter 9's line of, quote, hit points represent a combination of physical and mental durability, the will to live, and luck. Those two lines really stand out to me. How tough your character is in combat and other dangerous situations. Hit points represent not just durability, but also luck. Hit points represent combat and luck. So maybe we actually can have it both ways. Why can't we say, hey, if initiative is being rolled, you have hit points. You get hit with the trap, you have hit points. But if a bandit sneaks up on you while you're asleep and cuts your throat, hit points are irrelevant. Fall damage is 1d6 for every 10 feet, but if you fall off a 100-foot cliff onto hard rocks below, maybe a percentile dice would be more appropriate. I mean, 90% of falls that occur at 7 stories or higher in real life, which is only 70 to 85 feet, are in fact lethal. But the streak goes both ways, not just for the players, but for the NPCs as well. Guess what, Rogue? You're not in combat when you sneak up on that bugbear. He has no hit points. We're telling a narrative here. And by the way, the dice have already decided that you passed your rolls and made it to him without making a sound on your stealth check. If you tell me you want to coup de grace him while he sleeps with your dagger, I'm not going to just give you a crit at 2d4s. I'm going to ask you to describe the scene for the entire table on how exactly you dispatch him. And the flip side of that coin, the bard's healing word isn't going to save his sister's life from the butcher if the party decides not to take the threat to her life seriously. Is this a perfect system? Not at all. It's an approach to the game that relies as much on the players as the dungeon masters. Do the players trust the dungeon master? That's the big portion. The other is how fair will the dungeon master be and how firm will they be with the rules? Can they be objective and allow a crazy plan to be pulled off by the players who are thinking smart and approach a scene logically? Can they tell the players no if they begin to see them abusing a system like this? Will the players buy in, even if it works against them and their character goals? And yes, alternatively, if you feel like auto death is too powerful in, well, a game, and that's what Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is after all, maybe you should consider tweaking the rules in other ways and just play around to see what works. Maybe defenseless killing strikes would make more sense as a percentile die roll. There's an 85% chance they just die instantly, a 12% chance they drop to 0 and begin dying, and a 3% chance they just take critical damage, which taps into that luck portion of hit points that we talked about earlier. Or maybe your table decides that a defenseless attack should be 5 times the normal dice instead of 2 times the normal dice. I mean, 5d8 damage from a crossbow bolt pressed into your back unexpectedly could be a nice middle ground, where your hero might survive, but if things come to mortal combat afterwards, they're going to start that being seriously injured. There have been times that I've had a villain with a hostage taken with a sword to her throat, and I just overruled any objection from my players I had about rolling initiative and letting them healing word them back up to life. At least one of those moments was quite contentious. And that's probably because that player didn't trust me, or I hadn't set the right expectations. But at the end of the day, I don't want to run a table where I let the game dictate and the game mechanics dictate the story and the logic. I mean, come on, I'm fair. I will allow your rogue to completely evade a fireball in a small room, but the girl being held with a dagger to her throat by a villain literally threatening and watching you, yeah, she's not gonna make it, okay, if you decide to ignore those warnings. So I intend to play around with these myself and see what I and my group like best, what works, and how can I make it feel more concrete to gain their trust, so when the moment comes, I can make the call and they don't bat an eye. And honestly, I'm not sure which is the best solution at this point, and would be very curious to hear what you guys think, or if you have any rules for these situations that should clearly kill a person but hit points moments. One thing I am convinced about, however, is that hit points fight against the narrative. Hit points, it breaks my immersion. And hit points being used during every single moment of a game is an outdated combat mechanic. Feel free to disagree with me in the argument section down below. I, of course, want to give a massive thank you to all of my amazing patrons over at welcomeadventures.com. Guys, it's because of you that I can keep doing this, and so for that, I am just incredibly grateful. If you guys like what I do here and you want to support more content like this, welcomeadventures.com is a great way to support the channel and snag some rewards for yourself, like copies of my ultimate builds and so on. If this is your first time here and you love role-playing games as much as I do, I would love to have you subscribe. Every week I put out new videos on GM tips, player tips, tutorials, and more. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, just hit the subscribe button down below and come join us. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Cody, and may your games be filled with awesome memories and even better friends. I'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah.